Pope Leo XIV begins his message with a tone of humility, without resorting to the traditional formalities of a papal discourse. He recognizes the seriousness of the historical moment and presents himself not as a distant figure, but as an ordinary man full of weaknesses. He mentions that when he is called to succeed Peter, he realizes the weight of the mission, but also the urgency of the moment. Instead of presenting great statements about the church or ecclesiastical guidelines, the new pope makes a simple but deep appeal, a return to the true heart of the gospel. He emphasizes that he does not trust his own strength or wisdom, but in God's mercy, which often chooses the weak and more humble to perform his great deeds. In a world marked by the pursuit of power and status, this posture of simplicity and sincerity brings a powerful contrast. The Pope invites us to a reflection on our own lives and how often we are called to serve unexpectedly. Your initial message already makes us think, what if the greatness wasn't what we do, but how much are we able to serve with love? Before we start, I want to make a simple but very important request. Write here in the comments the city and the country from where you are watching. Because while this mass unfolds, while signs appear all over the world, I want to know where you are, where you watch, where you expect. Each name, each place is like a lit candle in the middle of darkness. And enjoy this video and subscribe to the channel, because this journey is just starting and you won't want to be left out of the next chapters. Now take a deep breath, because what you will hear next maybe change the way you see the times we live forever. The Pope makes an urgent call so that everyone will return to the heart of the gospel, not just as a set of doctrines, but as a way of life. In times of chaos and confusion, he points out that what the world needs most is the simplicity and depth of Christ's message. He challenges us to reflect on the true essence of Christianity, which is not in elaborate words or rituals, but in the practice of unconditional love and mercy. The figure of Jesus, humble and servant, is the model to follow, a model that contradicts the standards of power and wealth that so often dominate society. The Pope reminds us that in an increasingly distant world of Christian values, it is crucial not only to hear the gospel, but live it authenticity, regardless of external circumstances. Your speech touches on the need for an inner transformation that leads to peace, forgiveness, and reconciliation, values that seem lost in the midst of current violence and divisions. The invitation is for each of us to reconnect with this fundamental call to love others as itself. Pope's voice resonates with a fervent and sincere request: peace. He calls for a world torn by war, violence, and divisions, a humanity that suffers in silence. He refers to specific conflicts such as war in Ukraine, the situation in Gaza, and the tensions between Israel and Palestine. But he goes further, recognizing that there are numerous nations whose names do not appear in the news, but which also carry the weight of unmarried tragedies. Every child who loses his life in a conflict, every innocent who suffers in the hands of violence, is a painful reminder that peace is still a distant dream for many. The Pope is not limited to a generic cry for peace. He calls everyone to unite in this cry of solidarity, highlighting the need for world leaders to prioritize dialogue, reconciliation, and humanization of conflicts. He asks the weapons to silence and that the hearts open to compassion. The challenge is immense, but the Pope, with his authority and tenderness, reminds us that true peace begins in each person's heart, in every gesture of love and forgiveness. It is a direct invitation to reflect on the role of each of us in building a more peaceful world. Pope Leo XIV stresses that true peace is not simply the absence of war, but the active presence of justice, fraternity, and mutual respect. He challenges us to look inside ourselves and realize that each of us is an agent of transformation, capable of contributing to the construction of peace. This process does not begin in the large dome of power, but in the heart of each individual. The way we respond to hatred, offense, division makes all the difference. Instead of following the logic of conflict, we can choose the logic of love. Instead of perpetuating separation, we can promote unity. The Pope brings a deep reflection on everyday actions, which are often more significant than grandiose gestures. He reminds us that peace is built on small gestures. How we treat the other, how we solve our conflicts, how we choose to react in times of tension. In seeking this inner peace, we have the power to radiate it to the world around us, making our lives a true message of reconciliation and love. In this segment, the Pope reflects on the intrinsic relationship between peace and justice. He points out that true peace can only exist when justice is realized, when human dignity is recognized and respected. He mentions dramatic situations, such as hunger and extreme poverty, which remain invisible to many, but which are an open wound in humanity. While millions live in inhuman conditions, the Pope reminds us that true peace is impossible as long as there is inequality, exclusion, and injustice. In his view, peace is not an abstract concept or something that is conquered only by treaties, but it is a continuous process of social justice in which the basic needs of all are met and human dignity is restored. Peace, therefore, is not limited to resolving war conflicts, but also extends to the fight against structural injustices that make the lives of many unbearable. For the Pope, this is the peace that Christ teaches us, a peace-based peace that guarantees everyone the right to a dignified life, far from violence, hunger, and oppression. Pope Leo XIV devotes words of deep inspiration to young people, calling them to embrace God's call, especially in times when uncertainties and fears can make them hesitate to follow the vocation. He urges them not to be intimidated by the superficiality of modern society, which often values the ephemeral to the detriment of the eternal. The Pope makes it clear that the world needs authentic testimonies of faith, courage, and service more than ever. The Church needs young people willing to swim against the current, those who do not seek status or security, but who have a burning desire to deliver their lives for something larger. The true vocation, whether in priesthood, religious life, or marriage, is born from a genuine encounter with Christ and from an unconditional love to humanity. For the Pope, it is not the search for power or recognition that must motivate, but the vocation to live the gospel in a radical and transforming way. He challenges young people to ask themselves, what would you do for humanity? How can you use your life to serve others and church? With these words, he arouses a flame of commitment and passion in the heart of those who listen to him. The Christian vocation is not limited to convents or churches, the Pope says. He points out that everyone is called to holiness, wherever they are, whether at work, family, or society. The vocation to Christian marriage, especially in the present times, where the commitment seems to be in crisis, is more important than ever. He invites couples to see marriage as a path of sanctification, in which genuine and sacrificial love must be the base. The same goes for professionals. The Christian life is not restricted to religious life, but must permeate every aspect of our journey, transforming the world from within. The Pope reminds us that each person has the responsibility to transform their environment, to live their faith into everyday life, whether in office, social networks, or in the community. In a world where success is often measured only in status or power, the true Christian vocation calls us to serve, to love, and to transform the realities in which we live, being light for those who live with us. True fulfillment is not in fame or recognition, but to be faithful to God's call in every spheres of life. Pope Leo XIV, with a tone of deep love and pastoral zeal, teaches us that the Christian vocation is first and foremost a call to service. It is not about achieving status or privileges, but of dedicating life to the well-being of others, especially the needy. He points out that while some vocations may seem more visible, they are all equally valuable in the eyes of God, because they all have their service. The Pope emphasizes that the true vocation is one that is born of a personal encounter with Christ, and that this encounter leads us to a radical surrender to the cause of love and justice. He challenges us to follow the example of Jesus, who washed the feet of the disciples, an act of supreme humility that demonstrates that greatness in the kingdom of God is not measured by power or authority, but by service to others. The Pope urges each of us to reflect on his own vocation and to question, how can I serve more? How can I be a presence of love and compassion in the world? With this reflection, he calls us to live with more generosity, more dedication, and above all, with more unconditional love. Pope Leo XIV, in his deep devotion to the Mother of Jesus, dedicates a significant part of his message to Mary, the first vocational. He sees her as the perfect model of response to the divine call. Mary's faith was not a passive faith, but an active faith that led her to pronounce her yes without hesitation, completely surrendered to God's plan. The Pope points out that by saying, "Here is the servant of the Lord," Mary not only agreed to be the Saviour's mother, but also surrendered to the divine will in a full and unrestricted way. Your answer is the perfect example of humility, confidence, and availability. The Pope invites us to follow Mary's example in our own walk of faith, to be people willing to say yes to the challenges and calls God makes us, even when it requires sacrifice, or requires more from us than we think can be capable. Mary, with her unshakable faith, is for the Pope the image of the perfect Christian, the one who is totally available to God to serve his plan of salvation. Looking at Mary, we are invited to reflect on how we are responding to God's calls in our lives. In a moment of recognition and deep gratitude, Pope Leo XIV speaks with reverence for his predecessors, especially Pope Francis, whose actions and teachings influence him deeply. He highlights Pope Francis's view of a church on the way out, a church that meets the peripheries, both geographical and existential, to serve the poorest and most marginalized. Pope Leo XIV states that Pope Francis' tenderness and courage continue to be a source of inspiration for his pontificate. Moreover, he also pays tribute to Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI, recognizing his theological depth and humility to renounce the papacy. The example of Benedict XVI, who knew how to place the mission of the Church above his own strength, is for Leo XIV a model of service and delivery to the cause of Christ. The continuity of the Petrine mission, however, is not seen as a uniform of styles, but as a transmission of gifts and values that continue to enrich the Church of Christ. Pope Leo XIV feels deeply honored and challenged by this legacy and reaffirms his commitment to the poor, peace, and true transformation of humanity. Pope Leo XIV calls us to reflect on the concept of the Church on the way out, a principle that has already been introduced by its predecessor, Pope Francis, but now gains new dimensions under his leadership. He reminds us that the Church cannot be an entity that remains in its own comfort, waiting for people to come to it. On the contrary, the Church must meet humanity, especially the most marginalized people, those who are on the fringes of society, the forgotten, of suffering. This meeting with the marginalized is not only physical, but it is an invitation to listen, welcome, and understand the pain and anguish of the other. Pope Leo XIV challenges us to get out of our comfort zones and to approach those who are farther from the Church, either for poverty or out of desperance. The true Church is one that walks with the people in their joys and sufferings. He reminds us that the poor, the excluded, and the marginalized are a vital part of the Church, and they are often the ones who evangelize and show us the true face of Christ. For the Pope, it is a mistake to think that the Church must be a refuge of comfort and safety. On the contrary, it must be a moving church that meets human pain and responds with compassion. Pope Leo XIV reflects on the greatness of the universal church, reminding us that although the church is a global community, it is rich in cultural, ethnic, and liturgical diversity. He underlines that this diversity should not be seen as a division, but as a rich expression of the beauty of the body of Christ. The unity of the Church, for the Pope, does not mean homogeneity or uniformity, but a communion that respects and celebrates differences. Each community, each culture, and every tradition within the Church has something unique and valuable to offer, and this exchange is essential for the renewal of the gospel. The Church, in its universality, must be able to integrate all expressions of faith that arise in different contexts, remaining faithful to the central message of Christ. The Pope sees this diversity as a great gift that strengthens the Church and makes it more capable of meeting the different spiritual needs of the world. Instead of trying to standardize all practices and thoughts, he invites us to embrace this diversity, recognizing that each of the voices and cultures has something precious to share in the path of faith. For him, true unity is that it is born of mutual respect and collaboration without erasing the differences that enrich the Church. Pope Leo XIV, in his words, highlights a fundamental feature of Christianity, his universality. He reminds us that the gospel is not a religion restricted to a specific culture or region. On the contrary, it is a message intended for all peoples at all times and places. The Pope talks about the importance of gospel tooking, which is the ability of the Church to become part of each culture, respecting its traditions, but always raising them in the light of Christ's message. In many cultures, Catholic faith mixes with ancestral practices, creating unique expressions of devotion that are deeply significant to the people who practice them. Intrusion is not an adaptation of the gospel, but an authentic integration that respects the dignity of each culture. Pope Leo XIV points out that instead of trying to impose a Western version of Christianity, the Church must learn from the wisdom of other cultures, purifying and raising what is good and true in each. This view makes Christianity even more powerful, for it is not just a religion for a type of person or nation, but for all cultures in its plurality and beauty. Pope Leo XIV brings out the global mission of the Church, an urgent call for Christians to take the gospel to all corners of the world. He especially highlights the peripheries, those regions or contexts where people are farther from God or where living conditions are more challenging. The Church must be a living force of transformation, not limited to a center of power or large cities, but seeking those on the edges, on the banks of society. This call to the peripheries is an invitation to look at those who are invisible or forgotten by society and the Church, to bring them the message of Christ and the hope of the gospel. But this mission is not just physical. It should also happen in the existential peripheries, in situations of emotional, spiritual, or mental suffering that afflict so many people. The Pope emphasizes that the Church must be a transformative presence, which goes where pain is deeper and where the need for love is more urgent. It is an invitation to the Church to get out of itself and throw themselves into the world with courage, leading the gospel to touch people's lives in their concrete and often painful realities. Pope Leo XIV concludes his message with a strong appeal to everyday holiness. He reminds us that often holiness is not in the great works, but in the little gestures of love and compassion we realize every day. He invites us to be agents of peace, starting in our own homes, in our workplaces, and even on social networks, which are often places of divisions and attacks. Peace is not just something to be desired, but something to be actively lived, and it begins in everyday life, in the simplest interactions. The Pope challenges everyone to be those who disarm hatred with love, who build bridges and make society more humane, more welcoming and fairer. He also reminds us that true faith is the one that sustains hope, especially in the darker moments. Finally, the Pope asks everyone to pray for him, that he may be a faithful pastor according to the heart of Christ, and that together we can build a fairer, peaceful and fraternal world from the gestures of love we realize every day. Now we want to know where you are watching us. Leave in the comments the city and the country you are in, so that Pope Leo XIV can bless every corner of the world with his words of peace and hope. Let's unite our voices in prayer and spread this message of love to all peoples. Like this video to show your support to this mission, and subscribe to the channel so as not to lose any message of faith, inspiration and transformation. Together, let's make a difference. May the peace of Christ be with all of you wherever you are.